The president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, is in Ottawa to meet with Prime Minister Mark Carney, a visit Carney says comes at a pivotal time. But what we value as a country is the deep relationship we have with Finland. That's an important meeting. It's important meeting because for our security, it's an important meeting for relations within Europe. It's important meeting for Ukraine, helping to develop out of this disorder. And I don't think that's too strong a word, disorder, in the international system, to rebuild a better system that works for the people of Canada, the people of Finland, the people of the world. It's the first formal bilateral meeting between the two at a time when both leaders have called for middle powers to come together. The meetings were focused on trade, defense, technology, and the Arctic. Something just happened in Ottawa, and almost nobody is talking about it. Two countries, one sitting on top of North America, one pressed right up against the Russian border in Europe, just made a move. A move that could quietly reshape how global power actually works. And before you scroll past thinking this is just another boring diplomatic handshake story, let me tell you what was actually on the table. Artificial intelligence infrastructure, Arctic control, a defense spending target so aggressive it makes most NATO countries look like they're playing pretend, and a trade partnership that both governments believe can double in size within a few years. This wasn't a courtesy visit. This was a signal. Now, here's the thing about signals. Most people miss them. They get buried under louder news. A war here, an election there, some tech billionaire tweeting something insane. But the people who understand geopolitics, they know the real moves don't always announce themselves with fireworks. Sometimes they look like a handshake on the steps of Parliament Hill. So let's slow this down. Let's actually look at what happened, because once you see the full picture, you'll understand why this meeting matters way more than it looks. Canada and Finland have lots of commonalities. We are advanced economies. We are sort of sparsely populated countries, love ice hockey. But yes, we want to become even closer in foreign and security policy and also deepen our trade relations. I think there's a lot of untapped potential in our trade, and we have lots of complementary interests, whether it's mining or advanced technologies like satellite systems, quantum computations, or defense dual-use technologies. So, but yes, Canada is, like Mark Carney says, a middle power, and that puts us in a similar type of position. So, at least within the group of Nordics, we also middle power as Marani and Canada want to diversify the economic relations. It's quite obvious that let's start with the obvious question. Why these two countries? What do Canada and Finland even have in common? More than you'd think. Both are advanced economies that are not superpowers. Both are sparsely populated compared to their geographic size. Both share a massive Arctic coastline. Both are NATO members. Both are deeply invested in critical minerals, green energy, and now artificial intelligence. And both are run by leaders who have been saying the same thing. The old global system is breaking down, and middle-sized countries need to stop waiting for the big powers to fix it. Prime Minister Mark Carney has described the current moment as a time of disorder in the international system. That's a careful phrase, but it means something very specific. The post-World War II architecture, the trade rules, the alliances, the institutions is fracturing. The United States is increasingly unpredictable. China is aggressively expanding its influence. Russia is at war in Europe. And smaller, wealthier, more democratic nations are realizing they have a choice. They can sit there and hope the superpowers sort things out, or they can start building their own networks. Canada and Finland are choosing the second option. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because Finland's position is unlike almost any other country in the world right now. Think about what Finland has been through in the last few years. For decades, Finland maintained a careful neutrality. It shared a 340-kilometer border with Russia and managed that relationship very deliberately. Then Russia invaded Ukraine and everything changed. Finland applied for NATO membership. It was officially admitted in April 2023. That means as of this summit, Finland has been a NATO member for exactly 3 years. 3 years ago, it was officially neutral. Now it's one of the most strategically significant members of the alliance because it has the longest NATO border with Russia of any member state. That's not a small thing. That's a complete transformation of Finland's entire strategic identity. It's highly important. I mean, of course, like the war of Ukraine is also very close to us, and we basically like close the sort of relations with Russia. So anyway, I mean, we need to diversify also and rebalance our trade. So we are also looking for partners and allies and closer and far away in these days, or Japan, South Korea are becoming even more important here. Canada, the UK, many countries in Africa is also so very sort of obvious, and it happened almost overnight by historical standards. So when Finnish President Alexander Stubb flew into Ottawa, he wasn't coming as a representative of some comfortable Scandinavian country doing fine. He was coming as the leader of a nation that has made an extremely consequential decision. A nation that is now on the front line of the most important security situation in Europe. A nation that needs allies it can genuinely trust. Not just allies on paper, real allies with shared interests, shared values, and something actual to offer each other. That changes the nature of the conversation entirely. Now, before we go further, I want to be transparent about something. Everything we're covering here, the trade figures, the agreements, the public statements, this is all based on public data, official government documents, historical context, and my own analysis of what it means. You are completely free to form your own views on this. The goal here is never to push any particular political agenda or spread hostility toward any country or government. This is geopolitical analysis, and the whole point is to understand the world more clearly. With that said, let's get into the part of this story that almost nobody is talking about, the economy. Because as much as we like to talk about shared values and common principles, at the end of the day, alliances are held together by mutual economic interest. And when you look at the trade relationship between Canada and Finland, you see something fascinating. It's already substantial. But both sides believe it's only scratching the surface of what's possible. In 2024, Finland exported about $1.1 billion worth of goods to Canada. Canada exported about $543 million to Finland. That's a trade flow that already exists, already has momentum, and already tells you what each country is actually good at producing. And what are they trading? This is where it gets really important, because what they're exchanging isn't furniture and chocolate. Finland's top exports to Canada are nickel mats and nickel ore. $81 million and nearly $80 million respectively in 2024 alone. Canada's biggest export to Finland is copper ore, coming in at $159 million. These are critical minerals, the raw materials that go into electric vehicle batteries, clean energy infrastructure, advanced electronics, and defense systems. These aren't just commodities, they are strategic assets in the 21st century economy. Whoever controls the supply chains for these materials controls a huge amount of leverage in the global transition away from fossil fuels. Both Canada and Finland understand this completely. But here's where the plot thickens. The most recent data from early 2026 shows some turbulence. In January 2026, Finland's exports to Canada dropped by 25.4% compared to the same month the previous year. But at the same time, Canadian exports to Finland surged by 33.5%, largely because copper ore imports nearly doubled. That kind of volatility in a critical minerals trade relationship is exactly the kind of thing that gets governments nervous. Supply chains for these materials cannot be unstable if you're trying to build a coherent industrial strategy. And it's exactly this instability that is driving both governments to want something more structured, more predictable, more resistant to shocks. Minister Puisto, Finland's Minister of Economic Affairs, who was part of this summit, believes they can double the trade between these two countries. Double it. That's not a modest tweak to existing flows. That's an entirely different level of economic integration. And when you hear someone like that say they want to double trade, the next question is always how. And the answer Finland and Canada have arrived at is technology. This is where the summit gets genuinely fascinating because the most significant agreement signed in Ottawa wasn't about minerals or icebreakers or military exercises. It was about artificial intelligence. Canada's Minister of AI and Digital Innovation, Evan Solomon, sat down with Minister Puisto and signed something called the Canada-Finland Joint Statement on Sovereign Technology and AI Cooperation. Let's unpack what sovereign technology actually means because it's a term you're going to be hearing a lot more over the next decade. Sovereign technology is the idea that a country should not have to depend on a foreign power for the fundamental digital infrastructure that runs its society. Your hospitals, your power grid, your financial system, your military communications, these increasingly run on software, on algorithms, on massive amounts of data processed in real time. If that software is made by a foreign company, if those algorithms were trained on servers you don't control, if the data flows through infrastructure you don't own, then you're vulnerable. Not in a dramatic invasion kind of way, but in a slow, structural, very serious kind of way. Canada and Finland are both staring at this problem and realizing they have complementary strengths. Canada has significant computing infrastructure, a world-class AI research community, access to clean energy for data centers, and a government that has invested heavily in building a national AI strategy. Finland has Nokia, one of the most important telecommunications companies in the world, particularly in 5G and 6G network infrastructure. It also has deep engineering expertise, strong universities, and a culture of technological innovation completely disproportionate to its population size of just 5.5 million people. When you combine what Canada brings with what Finland brings, you get something that neither could build alone. One of the most concrete outcomes of this summit was a memorandum of understanding between Export Development Canada and Nokia, specifically to support Nokia's efforts around what they're calling AI gigafactories. Take a moment with that term, not data centers, not server farms. Gigafactories, the same language used for massive industrial manufacturing plants. They're treating AI compute infrastructure, the way a previous generation treated steel mills, as fundamental industrial capability, as something a serious country needs to have domestically if it wants to compete in the decades ahead. They're also working together on frontier AI models, the most powerful, most capable AI systems, with a specific focus on making safety a foundational design principle, not an afterthought. This matters because the race to build the most powerful AI systems has in many cases been driven by companies and governments who treat safety as secondary. Canada and Finland are explicitly saying they want to do it differently. Whether they succeed is a separate question, but the intention represents a meaningful policy choice. And then there's quantum computing. The summit included commitments around a Canadian quantum trade mission to Finland, designed to link universities, startups, and established technology companies in a shared quantum ecosystem across the North Atlantic. Quantum computing is still in its relatively early stages, but the countries that build the infrastructure, the talent, and the industrial base for it now will have enormous advantages when the technology matures. Connecting Canada and Finland's quantum research communities isn't just academic cooperation. It's long-term strategic positioning. Now let's talk about the Arctic, because this is where Finland's value to Canada goes from interesting to absolutely extraordinary. Arctic sovereignty is one of those issues that most people in temperate climates don't think about very much, but it is rapidly becoming one of the most contested geopolitical battlegrounds on Earth. As climate change melts Arctic ice, two things are happening simultaneously. First, previously inaccessible deposits of critical minerals are becoming reachable. Second, shipping routes that were previously impassable are opening up, dramatically shortening transit times between Europe, North America, and Asia. The Northwest Passage running through Canadian Arctic waters could eventually become a major global shipping route, and control of that passage has enormous economic and security implications. Canada has the geography. Canada has the Arctic coastline. Canada has sovereign claims to some of the most resource-rich Arctic territory in the world. What Canada does not have is Finland's expertise in actually operating in that environment. Minister Pisto shared a statistic during his visit that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. Finland has designed 80% of the world's icebreakers and built half of them, 80% of the entire global fleet of vessels capable of operating in Arctic ice conditions. Finland designed most of them. That is not a coincidence. It is the result of decades of concentrated national investment in a very specific area of maritime engineering. And now that expertise is becoming relevant to the entire world. The Canada-Finland duo on maritime capabilities and industrial partnerships is essentially Canada saying we have the Arctic. You have the technology to operate in it. Let's build something together. This is exactly the kind of complementary partnership that makes strategic sense. Canada's Arctic sovereignty claims are only meaningful if Canada can actually project capability into that region. Right now, that capability is limited. Partnering with the country that knows more about Arctic maritime operations than anyone else on the planet is a rational move, and it's one that has implications well beyond the two countries themselves. But here's the thing, nobody is saying out loud. This Arctic partnership is also directly relevant to the Russia situation. Finland shares that long border with Russia. Canada's Arctic territory sits across the pole from Russia's massive Arctic coastline, where Russia has been aggressively expanding military installations for years. Deepening maritime and security cooperation between Canada and Finland in the Arctic is not just economic. It is a strategic statement about who controls the Northern Hemisphere's most contested frontier. The meeting in Ottawa was also, now whether anyone explicitly said so or not, a conversation about Russia, which brings us to defense. And this is where the summit produced its most startling announcement. In the current NATO debate, the long-standing benchmark has been 2% of GDP spent on defense. Many allies struggle to hit that number. Some miss it consistently. The political friction within NATO over defense spending burdens has been a recurring sore point. So when Canada and Finland jointly reaffirmed a commitment to reach 5% of GDP in defense and security spending by 2035, it wasn't just a number. It was a declaration of seriousness. It was both governments saying publicly that they believe the security situation is grave enough to justify an extremely aggressive investment in their own defense capabilities. 5% of GDP is a massive commitment. Finland's GDP is roughly $300 billion. 5% of that is $15 billion per year in defense spending. Canada's GDP is around $2.2 trillion. 5% is $110 billion annually. Neither country currently spends anywhere near those levels. Getting from here to there requires industrial expansion, workforce development, procurement decisions, and long-term planning. It's a multi-decade project. The fact that both governments are jointly committing to it creates a form of mutual accountability. Yeah, and the defense cooperation goes beyond spending levels. The two countries have launched negotiations on a General Security of Information Agreement, essentially a formal framework for intelligence sharing at a higher level than currently exists. This opens up the possibility of genuine operational coordination between their defense industries, their intelligence services, and their military planning processes. Minister Pisto was particularly emphatic about the importance of dual-use technologies, things like 5G, 6G, and satellite systems that serve both civilian and military purposes. This is where the technology cooperation and the defense cooperation start to merge into a single coherent strategy. You build sovereign AI infrastructure, and it also has defense applications. You build Arctic maritime capability, and it also has security implications. The civilian and military dimensions of this partnership are not separate tracks. They're the same track. And then there is the Russia piece stated plainly. Finland has essentially closed its relationship with Russia. The border that was once a managed coexistence is now a security perimeter. Trade that once flowed between Finland and its giant neighbor has collapsed. Finland has made a decisive choice about which side of the new global divide it stands on, and the consequences are real. The loss of a major trading partner, the security costs of maintaining readiness on a long exposed border, the economic disruption of reorienting supply chains entirely. Finland is doing all of this deliberately, and part of doing it deliberately means finding new partners who are far away, geographically distant from Russia's reach, economically complementary, and politically reliable. Canada fits that description almost perfectly. It's worth stepping back for a moment to acknowledge the challenges, because not everything about this partnership is smooth sailing. Finland's economic growth in recent years has been modest, around 0.5%, while projections for 2026 were initially more optimistic. Global uncertainty has forced expectations downward. The war in Ukraine, volatility in energy markets, and concerns about a broader global recession are all creating headwinds. The trade volatility we discussed, that 25% drop in Finnish exports to Canada in January 2026, is a reminder that even well-intentioned partnerships can be disrupted by forces outside either government's control. Finland's economic complexity is impressive. It ranks 12th in the world. GDP per capita around $53,000. Canada sits at 30th with GDP per capita around $543,300. These are wealthy, sophisticated economies. But wealth and sophistication don't make you immune to global disorder. They just give you more tools to navigate it. The question that hangs over all of this is simple but enormous. Can middle powers actually matter? In a world increasingly dominated by the competition between the United States and China, with Russia running a brutal war in the background and global institutions struggling to function, can two countries the size of Canada and Finland genuinely shape outcomes that weren't going to happen anyway? The honest answer is probably not on their own. But that's not what they're trying to do. What they're doing is something more subtle and potentially more durable. They are building a network, a web of agreements, shared capabilities, aligned interests, and mutual dependencies that makes each of them more resilient, more capable, and more relevant than they would be operating alone. What makes this particular partnership interesting is the combination of what each country brings. Finland brings Arctic expertise, telecommunications, infrastructure, engineering depth, a frontline perspective on Russian aggression, and membership in the EU alongside NATO. Canada brings geographic scale, critical mineral wealth, AI research infrastructure, a large and diverse economy, and a continental position that keeps it slightly removed from Europe's immediate crisis while still being firmly in the Western alliance. Together, they cover dimensions that neither covers alone. The agreements they've signed on AI, on quantum computing, on Arctic maritime capability, on intelligence sharing, on defense spending are not vague aspirations. They are specific actionable commitments, named companies, named ministries, named milestones. Minister Pisto said he hopes to see the Canada-Finland relationship much closer in 3 to 5 years. Given where they're starting from and given the ambition of what they've put on paper, that seems genuinely achievable. Not guaranteed. Nothing in geopolitics is guaranteed, but achievable. So here's where we land. The Ottawa summit was not just a diplomatic formality. It was the visible expression of a strategic calculation that both governments have been making for several years. The world is changing. Old dependencies are becoming liabilities. New partnerships need to be built on shared capability, not just shared sentiment. And the window for building those partnerships is right now. While the global order is still fluid enough to be shaped, Canada and Finland are not waiting for the superpowers to sort things out. They are building their own infrastructure, securing their own supply chains, developing their own technologies, defending their own territory. Whether you see that as inspiring or insufficient probably depends on how pessimistic you are about the state of the world. But here's what I'd leave you with. Every major shift in global order has looked from the inside like chaos. The periods between old systems and new ones are always messy, always dangerous. And in those periods, the countries that position themselves carefully, that build real capability, real alliances, real leverage, tend to emerge in better shape than the ones that just wait and hope. The Canada-Finland alliance is a bet on that logic, and if they're right about the world, they're navigating. We might be watching the early stages of something that looks years from now like the beginning of a genuinely new global architecture. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, the real economics, the real strategy, the stuff underneath the headlines, drop a comment with what you'd want to break down next. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone who actually thinks about how the world works. That's the only algorithm that matters.